Intimate partner violence, or what we like to say in clinical speak, situational or bidirectional violence, is another way of talking about couple violence and what that looks like when both partners may be engaging in acts of violence that they are inflicting upon each other. It's October, and that means that it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and it's an opportunity for each of us to join forces to raise awareness about the far-reaching and destructive impact of domestic violence in our communities. The Everyone Knows Someone campaign focuses on the theme that each of us, every one of us, knows somebody affected by domestic violence, whether you realize it or not. There are definitely some alarming domestic violence statistics, and as I said last week, I'm going to be teaching on this and talking about this every Thursday from now until the end of the month. So I'm going to be sharing different angles on domestic violence to raise your awareness about what's going on. In the United States, nearly every 1 in 2 women and more than 2 in 5 men reported experiencing intimate partner violence at some point in their lifetime. Every minute, it's 7:02 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Before the clock strikes 7:03, 32 people will experience intimate partner violence in the United States. That is alarming. It is terrifying. 1 in 4 men in the United States has endured severe physical violence from an intimate partner, and over 47% of women have encountered contact sexual violence, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner during their lifetime. If you or someone that you know is a victim of domestic violence, you can call 911 or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Again, that's 1-800-799-7233. One of the important things to know when it comes to this situational, this bidirectional exchange of violence in a couple is that it's not accidental. It is not an accident that a decision is consciously being made to use physical force during conflict. Oh, what does that look like in some of your relationships? It could be throwing things at each other. It could be pushing or grabbing or biting or kicking. Fill in the blank. You know what it looks like in your relationship, or you know what it looks like in the relationship of someone that you care about. You've seen it. Many of you have experienced it. And it's so important to understand, because I'm sure many of you have heard, just like I have, there's so many different explanations that people give for what they believe causes intimate partner violence, or this exchange of violence within the couple. And I can't emphasize enough that it is a choice. You know, I'm always mindful when I'm working with clients, or when I'm talking, to just people, depending on what type of setting I'm in. And, people get to talking about the I can't help it. That, it just happens, as if to suggest that people don't have any way to control themselves. Violence is a learned behavior. It is a learned behavior for many people that began in their youth because they saw it, they experienced it, they lived it, and because there's so many different moving parts when it comes to why individuals in a relationship would choose to resort to violence, it's virtually impossible to say that there's one single factor as to why it's happening. There are some ideas though that I want to share with you, that I want to sort of provoke your thoughts about, that I think that it is really important for you to take into consideration. I don't know if you're familiar with the word entitlement or destructive entitlement when it comes to human behavior, but you have some people who believe that, because they're in a relationship with you, whether they be male or female, or because they are the primary breadwinner, or because they are the male, or because they are the female, or because the house is in their name, or because the car is in their name, you fill in the blank. They believe that they have a right to respond violently when they're upset about something. There are a lot of people who, because of how they were raised, or just because of how they view life and relationships, they may feel like there's a hierarchy element within the relationship, and because of that, they believe that they have a right to exert power and control over their partner. And then there's some, and I find myself talking about this one quite a bit because I am a firm believer that each of us teaches other people how to treat us. And I believe that there are those who are either perpetrators of violence because they believe that they can get away with it. And I believe that there are victims of violence who tolerate it in part because they believe that their partner is going to get away with it. So then the mindset becomes, well, what's the use? Why should I say anything, or why should I try to do anything different when I'm not going to be heard or seen in the first place, and this person is going to get away with it? They always have. For some others, though, the choice to resort to violence is because it's been the vehicle that has been used to get your way. You learned, maybe even as a child, that if you throw things, or if you scream or yell or hoop or holler, or if you intimidate, that you're going to get your way. So that learned experience carries over into adolescence, it carries over into adulthood, and you have this narrative in your mind that says, you know what? I know how to get my way. I'm going to intimidate. I'm going to exert power and control. I'm going to instill some fear in order to be able to get my way. And then there's those who resort to violence because they believe that what they want, what they need, what they say must take priority over everybody else's needs, over everybody else's wants. But I want to dig a little bit deeper because I think that it's really important for you to understand what that looks like when you break it down categorically. And what I mean by that is, so as we're looking at these things that can cause or contribute to domestic violence, excuse me, I think that it's really important for you to understand that things like social forces can play a pivotal role in informing and influencing how the abuser develops their values and their attitudes. And because of those values and attitudes, an environment that is conducive to abuse can be staged. It can be rewarded, it can be unpunished, and it can reinforce the abuser's decision to abuse. So when I talk about social forces, I'm talking about things like gender role identity. When you look at that within the context of men, we live in a masculine society. We live in a society that acknowledges that in most cases men are stronger than women. We're living now in a political climate where the attempts to exert power and control through machismo is definitely something that is on the forefront. There is this climate of belittling and degrading and demeaning women and suggesting that there is a male superiority that has a right to tell women what they can do with their bodies, that has a right to dictate any number of things, that doesn't necessarily sit well with everybody who is being subjected to this masculine behavior. And then there's family dynamics that fall under this social forces category that, again, when you're looking at the role of men, a lot of cultural norms are conveyed that men have the right to make all of the decisions, and that what the man says goes, and it's, he's the king of the house, and it's the king's castle, and all of these things. But I don't want you to think that these gender role identities are applicable just for men, because they're not. You've heard me say before that one of the challenges that we frequently run into in this society that has been capitalized on, quite frankly, by some women, is that you have some women that initiate the violence and then curl up in a ball and go into victim mode. There's not going to be an acceptance of domestic violence regardless of who the perpetrator is. Like, it shouldn't be accepted, whether it's the man starting it or the woman starting it. People need to keep their hands to themselves, right? But when you look at the role where women is concerned, we live in a society that, particularly where our judicial system is concerned, in many jurisdictions, not all, but in many jurisdictions, all a woman has to do is shed some tears and be distraught, and chances are the court is going to rule in her favor and not even necessarily take into consideration that she, in actuality, was the perpetrator of the abuse. And that's problematic as well. Then we also have media, or, in this case, we have social media that is playing a major contributing role in the social forces that are perpetuating this cycle of violence. And it's like everything is a reel, everything has to be recorded, and so much violence is made light of, particularly when in a domestic context, right? It's like, when there's police brutality, depending on what ethnic group you belong to, it's not made light of. But when it comes to domestic violence, I remember seeing the footage of Ray Rice knocking his girlfriend out in the elevator. And I remember at that time people actually laughing about that. People actually saying, well, she must have did something. What? It's extreme. It's extreme. But again, the flip side of it is, in a therapeutic role, just being a human being navigating life day to day, there have been plenty of occasions where I have seen females go hands on, and they'll throw hands like they throwing, like a dude throwing hands. And what I say and have said with couples that I work with is, if folks don't learn how to keep their hands to themselves, somebody is possibly going to end up dead, in jail, or both. If you have to resort to violence to resolve conflict or to solve your problems, you have a problem. And that problem absolutely, positively needs to be addressed. You have peer groups that are encouraging and promoting all types of acts of violence that are alarming, and because of that, there's this social pressure. It reminds me, and I've said to you all before, I see life in pictures, right? But it reminds me of a movie that was out several years ago called Mississippi Burning. And in that movie, one of the police officers said to one of his deputies that he had a problem at home and he needed to go see about it. And he took two of his male friends with him, and he walked in the house and proceeded to beat his wife within an inch of her life. And a big part of that was he was encouraged. He was encouraged to do that by his peer group to show his wife who was boss. And it's unfortunate, but that's a real thing. It is absolutely, positively a real thing that peer pressure exists when it comes to domestic violence. How many of you have said to, one of your girlfriends, girl, that wasn't, if that was me, I would do X, Y, and Z. I would smother him. I'd slap. Oh my goodness. So there's this egging on. There's this peanut gallery fan club that is the hype man for violence within the relationship. And then, of course, there's the social group of sports. This competition and aggression and dominance is praised. And everybody that knows me knows that I absolutely, positively love football. Good Lord, it's one of the most barbaric sports on planet Earth. But everybody knows that I love football. But when you look at the role that sports can play in domestic violence, statistics have shown, and forgive me, I don't have that exact stat in front of me, but it is a statistic. Statistics have shown that during particular athletic events like the Super Bowl, like the World Series, like the Stanley Cup, like, those major, the NBA playoffs and stuff like that, research has shown that there's an escalation in domestic violence during certain sporting events. Well, we need to take a look at that. What is the connection between that, and what role is that playing in your life? So oftentimes, impunity plays a role in this perpetual cycle of violence in our relationships, meaning that so oftentimes there aren't any negative repercussions for the attitudes and behaviors that lend themselves to violence in the relationship. And because of that, oftentimes the excuses that the perpetrator makes are accepted. And like, for example, in the therapeutic role, people will tell me, oh, well, when she drinks, she gets violent, or when he drinks, he gets violent, or when he or she, smokes weed, or when he or she is fiending for a line, or whatever it is. There's a projection or a transference of the violence onto whatever the substance use is. It may be because the physical intimacy wasn't what the person wanted it to be, or whatever the case may be. But the bottom line is that we live in a society where far too often the excuses for the violence are accepted, and it creates this vicious cycle that keeps the cycle of violence going to the detriment of all parties involved. If you or someone that you know is a victim of intimate partner violence, please call 911 or the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Again, that's 1-800-799-7233. I feel like I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't also explain to you the things that do not cause a relationship abuse, but are often blamed for the abuse. People will say that they abused because they were provoked, right? But research has clearly shown that the things that I'm getting ready to share with you are not causes for the domestic violence. They're not causes for the intimate violence. Someone can poke the bear. They can absolutely poke the bear. They can, in essence, lead you to say, well, oh, they're provoking me. But as old school as it sounds, there is truth in that you don't have to react just because somebody is trying to stir the pot. The only person that you have control of is yourself. So whether someone is trying to provoke you into a fight or not, you have the choice to walk away. Genetic factors. Just because somebody has been predisposed to violence, just because someone, they were born to one or both of their parents are violent, doesn't mean that they have to be a violent person. People try to say that the behavior of the victim or problems in the relationship is why they resort to violence, or stress, or drugs or alcohol, or testosterone, or loss of control, or anger, or communication problems, illness, mental health issues, culture, poverty. None of these things are causes. They can be contributing factors, but they're not causes. And the reason why they're not causes is because violence is a choice. You have the choice of swinging or not. You have the choice of throwing something or not. You have the choice of gripping somebody up or not. You have a choice. And it's going to require you to be man enough, to be woman enough, to be adult enough to admit that nobody made you do it, and nothing made you do it. You chose to resolve your problems. You chose to resolve your conflict by becoming an abuser. So when you take into consideration that abuse happens when you try to exert control or hurt over the person, in this case that we're talking about tonight, over the person that you're in a relationship with, and oh, by the way, it's not just physical, it can also be verbal and mental, and we're going to talk about that in, the coming up lives. You need to be able to own the fact that you're an abuser. You have to make a conscious decision to put your big girl undergarments on or your big boy undergarments on and admit as to whether or not you are an abuser. Do you use fear or control your partner? This is not gender specific, folks. Let me just tell you, I've been doing this work a long time, and I have encountered more male abusers than I have female, but Lord knows I have encountered quite a few female abusers, verbally, emotionally, and physically. So there's no gender bias here in this discussion tonight. Everything that I'm sharing could be applicable regardless of whether your gender is whatever your gender is. Do you push, shove, or throw your partner around into walls, floors, whatever the case may be? Do you slap your partner with an open hand? Do you make your partner ask for your permission for things? Do you control who your partner can see or be with? Do you criticize your partner's friends and relatives? Do you grab or injure your partner by holding or squeezing too tightly? Do you feel that your partner spends too much time with family or friends? Are you okay embarrassing your partner? Do you clock or control your partner's spending? Do you try and strangle your partner? Do you pinch your partner? Do you pluck your partner? Do you blame your partner for actions or behavior? Do you force your partner to be intimate when they don't want to? Do you usually get your way and use force or manipulation to get it? There's not one thing, not one single solitary thing that I just said that's gender specific. Everything is applicable to men and women. It's applicable. It's applicable in the LGBTQIA plus community. It's applicable in the heterosexual community. It's applicable in African Americans, in Asians, in Latinos, in Caucasians, in poor folks, in wealthy folks, in middle class folks. It's applicable on the East Coast, the West Coast, the Midwest, the Caribbean, Europe, the UK. It's applicable. It's applicable to all people everywhere. And if you identify with any of these behaviors that I just shared with you, you, sir, you, ma'am, you, they are an abuser. Say it with Dr. Pitts. I am an abuser. And if you can honestly and truthfully, even though it may be embarrassing and humiliating and a hard pill to swallow, if you can own the fact that you are an abuser, my challenge to you tonight is to get help. There are battering intervention and prevention programs available to you for support. Again, you can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. I want to encourage you. I'm talking to the abusers now. I want to encourage you to take the necessary steps that you need to take to get a way out of your abusive nature and behaviors. The change starts with a commitment to do so. You have to admit that you're an abuser, and you have to commit to getting the help that you need. You have to be able to identify your own abusive behavior. You've got to humble yourself, folks. You have to humble yourself and admit that you need help. And then you have to reach out for it. It's not going to happen overnight. For many of you, if not most of you that identify as an abuser, it didn't happen overnight. You just didn't wake up one day and, become an abuser for the past few years. So there's room for you to make progress. But you have to be willing to take the necessary action to stop engaging in harmful behaviors to others. It's your decision to make, and you can do that by contacting a battering intervention and prevention program. So some of you might not have ever heard that term before. You might want to know, what is it? Well, the acronym is BIP, B-I-P-P. A battering intervention and prevention program is a court-approved educational program designed to give you the tools needed to achieve healthy, intimate partner relationships. The program teaches you to recognize abuse, take accountability, and change unhealthy behaviors. You don't have to be court-ordered into a BIP. You can make the decision to go voluntarily, because of course, if you can imagine, if you're court-ordered to one, that's a whole nother level of challenge. It's going to require humility on your part to admit that you need help, and know that, this is just not some willy-nilly, program. It has guidelines, and there are going to be trained employees that can help you, that have, appropriate training and credentials to help address this. We have to do criminal background checks on the employees that are responsible for helping you through these programs. We have to meet state guidelines in these programs, and we have a number of other things that we have to adhere to ensure that these programs are running effectively, so that we can be instrumental in getting you the help that you so desperately need, so that you can get a handle on the abusive behaviors. The choice is yours, folks. You don't have to be abused, and you don't have to be an abuser. The first step to recovery is admitting that you have a problem. And you can start admitting it right now. There is no better time than the present to acknowledge it, so that you can confront it, so that you can conquer it. My recommendation is always going to be, do not be too proud to seek therapeutic support. Help is here for you. There are clinicians all over the country, all over the world, that are educated, equipped, and empowered to be a source of healing and hope and help for you. You are worth it. But it's not enough for me to say that. You have to get to a place and space where you believe that. And when you really truly start to believe that, you will also then come to the realization that there is help for you. You just have to choose to seek it, to accept it, and to apply it, so that you can transition into a stronger, healthier, better version of yourself, because you are worth it. That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you for logging in. I'll see you next Thursday. Good night.